usually tend to eat and enjoy, and a lot of fruits and vegetables. And so I wanted to state that a diet that is high in fruits and vegetables or moderate in fruits and vegetables provides on average about 1 gram of these phytochemicals combined per day. So for example, the bioactive class of compounds, alkaloids, we'll find those in black pepper. For organosulfur compounds, we'll find those in cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cabbage, and Brussels sprouts. For terpenoids, we'll find those in orange foods often, orange, yellow, red, and that would be like carrots. And then phenolalics, we'll see these in green tea most famously. So again, because we can get a sufficient amount of these phytonutrients from a diet with a variety of colorful fruits and vegetables, I wouldn't recommend taking any dietary supplement for an individual phytochemical or phytonutrient, but instead add these foods with the compounds daily into your diet and kind of change up what those are each day. So for example, this is one of my favorite tables. I'm gonna leave it up for you to read as I talk, but these are what I called our rainbow-hued antioxidants or our rainbow-hued phytochemicals. Now, these phytochemicals have been studied in the literature extensively on different disease states like cancer, cardiovascular disease, dementia, and diabetes. But these are found in common colorful foods, and I think that's the important part to highlight here. And so the recommendation that I would give to add fruits and vegetables is that even though we have an established recommendation where we're going to aim for 5 a day, about 2 fruits or 3 vegetables, really the easiest way I think to do that is to take your plate, make it as colorful as possible, aim to have it about half colors as possible, and pick 2 colors if you can from here. So I want to point out here in this table as well some of the most famous antioxidants you might have heard of and what foods you can find them in. In our blue and purple group, there's resveratrol. We'll find those in grapes, blueberries, and other dark berries. From our green group is isocyanates. That's going to be like those organosulfur compounds or diindolylmethane. We find those again in those cruciferous veggies, bok choy, broccoli, cabbage, delicious. Orange and yellow are beta carotene. We're going to find in carrots, and around this time appropriate this season, they're in pumpkins, as well as sweet potatoes. In red, we have our lycopene. Watermelon season's ending, tomato season's ending, but we can still enjoy them. And then we don't want to forget our tan and our white fruits and veggies. I think they're often overlooked and maybe they get a bad rap, but foods like mushrooms, garlic, onions, and leeks will also provide beneficial phytonutrients in the diet. So, make sure. So, even though I said fill up half your plate if you can with colorful fruits and vegetables. If you're interested in what these recommendations or these serving sizes look like when we're estimating dietary quality in studies, or if we're recommending and writing diets clinically, this is what we consider a serving of fruits and vegetables. You'll see on one side, depending on your orientation to the screen, fruits, and on the other side, vegetables. What this might look like for a day of intake for meeting our 5 a day goal, as just a general goal, would look like maybe you'll have a small fruit at breakfast, like you'll have a sliced apple on the side. And then maybe you're going to have some melon with dinner because you got the last good watermelon of the season. Your lunch then might be a salad with some spinach and some bell pepper as a base, and your dinner could have a side of green beans. And then I also wanted to point out that when we build our plates, we can do food combinations for synergistic bioavailability. What synergistic bioavailability means is that by consuming foods with complementary vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients in them, we can increase the amount of phytonutrients, vitamins, and minerals that our body is able to absorb. So you might notice some of these as common favorite pairings of foods. And so that tells me, I think intuitively, as people, we found that these not only taste good together, but we might feel a little bit better when we eat these together. So some of my favorite on here are tomato and garlic, lemon and green tea, milk and coffee, and salmon and broccoli. The next essential nutrient is to increase beneficial fats. So again, many of those phytonutrients, vitamins, and minerals that come from our fruits and vegetables that are important to our health require fat to be absorbed optimally in our body. However, fat is a calorie or energy dense nutrient where it provides 9 calories per gram of fat. So when we're making selections of what fats to include in our diet, there's asked to be mindful and deliberate about those, and when possible, increase the beneficial fats on the plate. And the one beneficial fat that I'm going to spend some time on today is one of the most well-known, and that is the omega-3 fatty acid. So if you look at these 5 omega-3 fatty acids here, these are their chemical structures. I always love to look at them because then it makes sense why they're called omega-3 fatty acids, because you can see the omega shape in that half ring structure. Now, these are unsaturated fats, so they have different roles in the body, and our body uses them differently than, say, saturated fats. These are common fats from animal foods, thinking like butter, but they're also found in plant-based fats, such as coconut oil, palm oil, which would be like sometimes the spreadable margarine. Now, we can find omega-3s in foods, and we can add those to our plate as well, or into our snacks. And so marine fish are they're probably famous for it, but they are the greatest source of omega-3 fatty acids we can get from a food source. And so these include things like herring, anchovies, salmon, trout, and mussels. So these are some good animal-based protein sources for omega-3 fatty acids. Our plant-based sources, though, they still are there, are walnuts, flaxseed, avocados, and olives are some of the higher sources of omega-3 fatty acids. Now, greater intake of omega-3 fatty acids have been associated with lower risk for, again, many of these aging-related, nutrition-related chronic diseases, such as cancer, cardiovascular disease, dementia, as well as rheumatoid arthritis and age-related macular degeneration. Now, many studies have looked at high doses of omega-3 fatty acids, and we're kind of going to go into those in the next slide, with looking at certain ratios. So looking here, ALA, DHA, and EPA are the most commonly studied omega-3s, and the doses that are studied are usually only attainable through a dietary supplement. However, dietary supplements vary as far as their composition and their quality, so I still don't always necessarily think they're the best option or generally recommend them. They may be appropriate in certain circumstances. So eating a diet rich in omega-3 fatty acids is associated, again, with protective effects for these chronic diseases. Now, there was one study, a cross-sectional study again, for about 2,000 adults, and they didn't have dementia, they didn't have a history of stroke. And for those individuals who had higher concentrations of omega-3 fatty acids circulating in the blood, they had better brain structure as measured by an MRI, and they had improved global cognitive function. And these were differences that were actually observed by the APOE genotype. So looking at our mechanisms of action on why omega-3s potentially are beneficial in healthy aging is that they could counteract age-related loss of muscle mass and improve cognitive function by reducing oxidative damage and inflammation. This image here shows a potential mechanism through which these omega-3 fatty acids can reduce inflammation in the brain specifically, so neuroinflammation, and improve cognitive function by reducing inflammation and oxidative stress in the brain cells. So again, looking at our serving sizes, if we were going to keep building on our day, thinking back to our breakfast, we might add a tablespoon of peanut butter now with that apple. And for our salad base with our spinach and bell peppers, we're going to be adding in 2 teaspoons of some olive oil on there and maybe some vinegar for some flavor. Adding this to our salad is going to help our body absorb the fat-soluble vitamins, especially vitamin E, vitamin D, and vitamin K. For dinner, we might choose to bring peanut butter back in and make a sauce, or we might have some avocado on the side. The next essential nutrient or recommendation is going to be to select lean proteins. Because of the high energy density of dietary fat, lean proteins are recommended to help achieve an energy balance for an individual. So there are many lean proteins, including from animal sources, but there is also plant-based, vegetarian, vegan options. This slide shows many recognizable foods here that are options. If you wanted to know the recommendation for protein in general, it's 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight for a healthy adult. Usually it will increase in older age, and some individuals, depending on what's going on for them, it could be 1.2 grams or to 1.6 grams per kilogram. Now that equates, if we're looking at someone who is 120 pounds, on the lower end is 35 grams of protein a day is the minimum. So I'm going to show you another curve. This curve might look really familiar to the accelerating aging curve earlier, except for this curve is now looking at an exponential decline rather than an increase. And so this is a graph that's showing the trajectories of muscle health or muscle mass throughout aging. And so it's showing that our muscle mass is not only attributed to the strength and how we build it later in life, but only, and as it relates to our muscle loss through our activities and our diet, but also it reflects the peak that was attained in earlier life. So from there, dietary proteins can help us protect this muscle mass because they provide amino acids that are needed for the synthesis of muscle proteins. And importantly, absorbed amino acids have an effect on stimulating muscle protein synthesis. So I'm going to start, this is a busy slide, but we're going to take a little bit of time here on it. And this is looking at proportions of amino acids in selected foods across food groups. So it's broken up from top to bottom. We're looking at animal foods, legumes, grains, nuts, vegetables, fruit, and mushrooms. And then we're looking at amino acids that are grouped as essential or non-essential. Now, essential amino acids are here in the black box. There are 9 of them. Very similar to the essential nutrients, these essential amino acids are ones that our body cannot make, so we have to get them through our food. And these are histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. So you might also notice looking at this chart that, yeah, it starts with animal foods up top. They have a higher proportion ratio of these essential amino acids, but they're also in plant-based protein foods, and surprisingly, maybe foods that we don't always associate as a protein food, such as kale, mushrooms, and apples. And so what's important here is to take away is that we still get some of these beneficial components from foods that we don't traditionally call protein foods. Now, within these essential amino acids are branched chain amino acids, or BCAAs. These are isoleucine, leucine, and valine. So many older adults may inadvertently experience protein malnutrition, and that can happen unintentionally due to appetite loss or certain medications that might have a side effect of anorexia. So therefore, we want to prioritize these high-quality lean proteins to promote healthy aging by preserving the lean muscle mass. This can help contribute to less frailty and less sarcopenia. So one of the key targets of these branched chain amino acids is the mTOR pathway. Now, one study, it was done in pigs, found that a beneficial ratio of branched chain amino acids was 2 to 2:1 of leucine, isoleucine, and valine, and that it was beneficial in moderating this mTOR pathway. Now, mTOR regulates a diverse range of cellular functionings and hallmarks of aging, such as cell growth, autophagy, senescence, and mitochondrial function. Now, what this diagram is also showing with our arrows here on the other side, the green arrow, is that these amino acids can also influence our dietary protein intake by influencing our appetite, and they also provide a balance on the red arrow on the protein synthesis within our body. So the conclusion from this slide is that by incorporating foods that have some of these branched chain amino acids, which are going to be the first 4 colors there, can help have a positive effect on aging by working on this specific pathway. Now, complete proteins. So a complete protein is one that would provide all 9 essential amino acids. So again, while that chart earlier showed animal-based protein sources will often provide all of these, there are many complete proteins that are plant-based. So our top row here is those that are commonly known animal-based complete proteins. Our middle row are plant-based complete proteins on their own, with soy sneaking in there on the bottom. But we can also do what would be combinations. So this is taking an equation and balancing each side. So we would say for one food that has 5 of the 9 essential amino acids, another one has 4 of the 9 essential amino acids, we want to pair those up and get a complete protein between the 2 of them. So common ones of complete protein pairings would be brown rice and black beans, oatmeal and peanut butter, and garbanzo beans and sesame hummus. So here's our serving sizes again for common proteins. Again, this is looking at plant and animal-based proteins on one side and then dairy-based proteins on the other. Dairy foods can be attributed, you can use them as a protein. That's why they're on this slide. Now, most protein needs for that individual, based on those calculations, are met by adding 2 or 3 servings of a protein to each meal, and then maybe having a protein with a snack. So if we're going back to our day, we might now make our oatmeal with a cup of milk, And we're gonna increase that amount of peanut butter to add some more protein to it. We also maybe we'll have a hard-boiled egg on the side. Now we're coming to lunch, and this one's not pictured here, but like for an average animal protein, the serving size looks about a deck of cards. So we're gonna add to our salad, we're gonna put some chicken on it and some cheese, maybe some feta. And then we're going to dinner, and our green beans are turning into a tofu stir fry. And we've had some nuts as a snack as we were making dinner. The next one is choosing whole grains. So in these images here, you'll see a lot of whole grains, and whole grains still have their exterior intact on them. It hasn't been removed by a machine through processing. It could be ground, but the outside hasn't been removed. Now this is important because that outside provides a dietary fiber for our body. Now there's two different types of fiber, soluble and insoluble fiber, that whole grains provide us, and both are important. Now I like to think of soluble fiber as a sponge, and I like to think of insoluble fiber as a broom. And these are both the cleaning tools that help move food through our digestive system. So looking at dietary fiber, we have this is a graph that is looking at dietary fiber intake and all-cause mortality. Now, dietary patterns that are higher fiber diets have been associated with a prevention of broad range of, again, these chronic age-related conditions like dementia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, but also type 2 diabetes, as well as chronic constipation. So this study here was looking at all-cause mortality and cardiovascular disease mortality, and found that there was a 15 to 30% decrease in mortality risk with daily fiber intake of 25 to 29 grams. There was a slight dose response curve where you can see that it's our grams of fiber, again, are on our x-axis here, that it starts to increase at the end there, and that it suggested that there is a greater protective benefit with the greater increase of dietary fiber. Now, the amount that they found here, the 25 to 29 grams, is an amount that aligns with the established age-based recommendations for dietary fiber intake. Now, another meta-analysis complements this finding and it suggested that each 10 gram of dietary fiber increase per day is associated with a 10% reduction in mortality risk from any cause. And so one of the potential mechanisms of action of dietary fiber and why it's protective and for our health as we age is through the gut microbiome. All right, so the gut microbiome can be influenced by physiological, social, and disease-related exposures in older people. So looking at this chart of an individual here, we have our dietary intake as it goes through our system and how we have external factors and internal factors affecting that. So we can see that there is a progressive decline in physiological function, both physical and cognitive. And we can also see that within the intestinal tract itself, there can be changes in the internal microenvironment. And this can in turn change the nutrient intake from older people. So what it's saying is that the changes in our gut microbiome can change what we eat. Now, other things that shape the microbiome in older people include lifelong lifestyle choices, contact with the external microenvironment, so that's like housing, social, environmental exposures, and then social network. They call this a social microbiome, but that's the other humans, pets, animals that you're exposed to. And these have reciprocal influences of age-related diseases and their treatment as well. So, therefore, pulling these together, if we can incorporate whole grains, we can work to modulate or shift our gut microbiome to a favorable balance to support our health. Because again, there is evidence suggesting that the composition of our gut microbiome can influence our cravings. So our gut microbiome might have us craving a little bit more sugar. Maybe if we start replacing the sugar with a little bit more whole grains, we're going to start craving those whole grains. Now, there are two ways we can support our microbiome, and those are through prebiotics and probiotics. I'm going to explain the differences. You might have heard both terms. For prebiotic and probiotic, a prebiotic are the carbohydrates which are resistant to digestion and they're fermented in the colon. They're found in foods and supplements. These are our soluble and insoluble fiber types. And then there are probiotics. These are the microorganisms, the bacteria and yeast that ferment fibers in the colon. These are our they make up our microbiome. They're found in foods that are naturally fermented, like sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles, yogurt, kefir, as well as supplements. Now, I want to say a food that combines both would be like a sourdough bread. Now, with prebiotic and probiotics, both promote a healthy microbiome. Both are found in foods and both are found in supplements. Again, I will promote foods first before supplements, especially in the prebiotics, as fiber supplements like Metamucil and Benefiber have not shown to have the same protective effects in the disease processes as dietary fiber. So this is a systematic review that looked at 9 randomized controlled trials of prebiotics and probiotics and aging-related outcomes specifically. And they found that there was 3 key ways in which these prebiotics and probiotics influence healthy aging. And that was through metabolism and cognition, specifically for glucose metabolism, through frailty status by improving one or more of the components within frailty, as well as inflammatory markers. So looking back to our servings, we continue to build our day. The right amount of whole grains each day will be dependent on each individual and the activity level, as our body uses the carbohydrates in these foods to fuel our body and mind. So we could add to our day, for example, a half cup of oatmeal at breakfast. I might have given that away by saying we made it with milk, but it's there. With lunch, we might add 2 slices of sourdough bread. We might mix with our nuts for a snack, a little bit of popcorn, and then we might have some brown rice with our tofu stir fry. Next, we're just going to limit processed foods. And I want to take a moment to make a distinction of something that processed foods are different than frozen or canned foods like fruits, vegetables, beans, or fish or chicken. Now, this is because those foods are great and nutrient-dense foods that are more shelf-stable, they're easily accessible, and they reduce the amount of time we have to spend shopping. So they are very different from processed foods, even if they are prepackaged foods. Sometimes they also still provide nutrients and sometimes even more. So fruits and vegetables are often frozen at the time of harvest. And so it's actually been found that they don't degrade or lose their nutrients to the same rate that we might getting a fresh produce from the grocery store, because there hasn't been that delay related to shipping and storage. So, and this is also to say that the hypothetical diet that we're building won't have any desserts or won't have any sweets, won't have any celebration. But what it is saying is that it is built in intentionally as a dessert, or maybe in this instance, it's going to be a piece of dark chocolate because we're going to increase our phytonutrients. So the key really in limiting the processed foods is to reduce the foods that are high in fat and high in sugar, as these have been associated with the negative effects on hallmarks of aging. Now, we're going to walk through again the potential mechanism on which this is happening. So all cells use glucose as the primary energy source, with very few exceptions. And high insulin, which is a hormone that helps us regulate glucose, becomes dysregulated. It can promote obesity and chronic disease. This can also result in changes in body composition that are intrinsically and interconnected with the biology of aging. Now, again, back with our gut microbiome, the selection of certain foods can also change our gut microbiome makeup. Now, changes to this gut microbiome, together with excess caloric intake or sugar intake, can alter the intestinal lining permeability or gut permeability, and that potentially can cause to infiltration of compounds outside the gut. Now, the excess of energy intake and permeability can increase to insulin resistance. And again, we have downstream disease effects like diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So this is our terms for our sugars found in food. So whenever you're gonna look at a recipe or you're gonna purchase something, you can turn around and look at the ingredient list on the backs, because many foods are gonna have natural sugars. So fruit has fructose, milk has lactose, those end on ose often. But you're going to look on the list for added sugars, and these could even be natural sugars like honey or agave nectar. The threshold for added sugars per day is 9 teaspoons for men and 6 teaspoons for women. So again, adding in processed foods that might be a convenient food, because again, they save time. Sometimes it can be tedious to prepare a meal for 1 or 2, or time is limited, it's a busy day. They can definitely be part of this process. So I'm just gonna recommend turning over that back and looking at the label. And that can help you identify the best option for you that's within your means. So the key items, this chart details what other components that are important, but I want to focus on ones from this talk, and that were your dietary fiber and your total sugars and your added sugars particularly. and then looking at the protein. The last essential nutrient is one that might potentially be the most important, and that is make eating a social event. A study of the National Health and Aging Trend Study estimated that 24% older adults, that's over 7 million, nearly 8 million individuals, are socially isolated. The Surgeon General's recent report noted that social isolation is a contributed factor for increasing mortality among older adults. A meta-analysis also found that social isolation was associated with a 32% higher risk for all-cause mortality. So foods and meals are an ideal opportunity to increase our social connections. Those who eat socially have been found to feel happier and more satisfied with their life. They're more trusting of others, more engaged with their local communities, and have higher social support when they need it. All of these are protective separately in healthy aging. Another study also found that dietary quality was higher among those who ate with others versus eating alone. And this may be due to those social support or social networks, which again were separately found to be associated with high dietary quality. So really briefly, one of the potentially most famous examples of social eating is the Blue Zones. And this was an expedition led by Dan Buettner in National Geographic, where he and his team identified Blue Zones. These were individuals who were where the population was 10 times more likely to live to the age of 100 or older compared to the US average. And so through their process, they identified 5 areas that were these Blue Zones. They found that these societies had highly plant-based diets that incorporated fruits and vegetables and whole grains, but social eating with eating meals with others were very large components. We'll also see that in some of our dietary scores that we use in science, like the Mediterranean diet does have a social component. It's really hard to measure and research, so that's why it's often not there. But this social eating is a way for us to connect food and culture to our nutrition, and I think that's a beautiful way to do it. So last bit of the mechanism is eating with others promotes longevity, both for men and women. So one study found that eating alone, yet living with others, was associated with a 21% higher risk for mortality compared to those who eat and live with others together, right? So that makes sense. So if you live with others, but you don't eat with them, you have a higher mortality risk. Now, the inverse was found for older men who eat with others yet live alone. Now, looking again at the effects between men and women, we found it again. So this diagram here is looking at some components related to dietary quality, frequency of eating with others, and mortality outcomes. And there was found to be significant positive associations between eating with others and frequency of dietary quality, as well as mental health. In turn, they found that better dietary quality was associated with less mortality risk, as well as physical functioning and general health. For women, they looked at this as well. Eating with others wasn't associated with any of the dietary quality, physical functioning, mental health, or general health measures. However, dietary quality and physical functioning were inversely associated with mortality risk, while mental health was positively associated. So, in conclusion, it really brings that no matter how we try to score it or how we try to define it, the essential nutrients for healthy aging are the same, but it's the amounts that will vary for each individual. And so a healthy eating pattern at any age includes foods that are high in vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. They include a variety of fruits and vegetables in colorful dark greens, reds, and orange. It includes fiber from legumes, whole grains, and more. It incorporates lean proteins and unsaturated fats, and it includes sharing meals with others. An healthy eating pattern also limits sugar-added foods and highly processed foods. So I'm going to leave you with my favorite quote from author Michael Pollan, and that's "Eat food, not too much, mostly plants." And as much as I love this quote, I think it'd be made a little bit better by adding "together" at the end. Thank you.
So, any questions for Dr. How do we get a copy of what she just presented?
I think that's an Anissa question.
We'll have that posted on the website by Monday. Give us a couple of days to get everything together. We'll post the recording of the video as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There's a question behind you, Kathy.
The first part was very interesting about the decrease in nutrients. And I think
Mhm.
of it all. And, sorry, thank you.
The economics play a big part of aging, and we are lucky here in Tucson to have community places that encourage healthy eating, and they educate others in different parts, in different neighborhoods. So I would love to see research in those neighborhoods, in those populations, and compare the research that you presented. And then I think that if we improve those things, we would all be healthier. And I think that's the goal here, especially in Tucson. Thank you for this.
Yes, thank you so much for mentioning that. It is an important component and one that could not fit in this time today, but there is, and it's something that there is a slide for, but the social resources available to help support food and high quality diets within our local community and national as well. We have a lot of great organizations within the university that have programming that is amazing, bringing it out into, as you said, our neighborhoods. Yeah. There's one behind you or online, I don't know.
Hi, thank you. Do you see any studies that show that the nutrients in fruits and vegetables have gone down over time in the last few decades because of environmental factors, soil quality, things like that?
I would say I don't specifically know of any study that looked at that directly. There is literature looking at, again, like that time of transit from harvest to plate that we can see some nutrients reduce. I know there is a lot of research in biotech looking at actually increasing the nutrition of certain foods. So for example, there's one for like yellow rice and other foods like that. But I think that if that research is out there, it's worth reading, or otherwise it's worth doing.
We have a question online. Isn't high liquid fructose intake very dangerous?
So I don't know if dangerous is the term I would use for it, but fructose is one of the sugars that is not metabolized by insulin. So it can, too much of it in our body can, it'll be metabolized in our liver, and that can cause some systemic downside effects. So again, fructose from fruit is going to be very different than that concentrated like high fructose corn syrup or other things like that. So again, just kind of selecting them in a balance, getting the fructose from fruit when possible. Yes. They have a mic coming for you.
The study that talked about eating with others, that was done before COVID, is that right?
Let me go back and look at the date published. Yes, that one was published before COVID. There are studies that have looked at, I'm kind of guessing your question, but there are studies that have looked at on whether or not COVID-19 changed our behaviors of eating with others. And we did find that during the active like isolation, stay at home orders, there was a decrease in meals with others, and that increase in social isolation. Recent evidence is kind of saying that maybe it's picking back up. And then one study did look at it like immediately, like pre and post that start, that March 2020 start date, and looked at dietary quality and did not see changes in dietary quality, however, from that.
It's also, I'm wondering if eating with others virtually would also have that same effect.
I would presume so, because I think it's about that connection. It's about sharing the food. An online cooking class, because you're also preparing the food together, is a way of sharing a meal with others as well. I think as a personal anecdote, I remember during the pandemic, my friends and I would have like cook-offs. We would share like in a group chain, like all of the food. So that was a way to try and connect too. So I don't think that that's bad. I don't think it's been studied.
Thank you.
You caught my attention when you mentioned vinegar added to foods to help absorption, because I fear that as you get older, your absorption possibility in your body goes down. So vinegar's not my favorite flavor. So I'm just trying to imagine what else would help.
Yeah, so with that one, so adding like an olive oil would help with the absorption of the the vitamins there. The vinegar would be for a flavor additive. There's not so much research with the absorption. Something that you could add to your dressing though would be like a citrus base, orange juice, lemon juice, or lime juice, because that will also help actually with the plant-based iron be absorbed.
For the CDC study where it reflected the intermediate diet and poor diet, the rise in the poor diet, was that like a survey that was sent out for their perception of their diet, or was that?
Okay, great question. So background for most of the research that's presented, use something called like a food frequency questionnaire, which is a almost 200 item of like, how often do you eat the food, how much, how do you prepare it? And that's the basis of much of the nutritional research. For the that data came from the NHANES study, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. They do a combination of like phone and mailing based food frequency questionnaires, but they also have like a mobile unit that goes out into communities, does body composition assessments. We'll do like blood draws so we can look at like antioxidants or nutrients in the blood as well. That graph wasn't from that, it was just from that food frequency questionnaire.
Okay, and then it was over, I think, the span of 15 years. Did that keep the same standards for the food throughout those 15 years, or did the standards increase as well?
The scoring?
For the scoring.
Yeah, so those stayed the same throughout it. I will say like the 2018 was the most recent I could find. So again, I don't have anything that shows the potential implications from COVID-19 yet. We don't have that data yet. I have 3. I think you have one online while she runs up there.
Okay.
Okay.
Are smoothies just as nutritious as eating whole fruits and veggies?
Yes, that is a great way and an easy way to get in your fruits and vegetables. When you're using the smoothie and you're using that whole fruit and vegetable, you're retaining that fiber, which is really important and beneficial. And you know, sometimes a smoothie is really refreshing, and it's a nice way to get them in.
I saw on the chart for different names for sugar, coconut was on there. Is coconut oil considered a sugar?
No, coconut oil is not considered a sugar, but coconut we can take and we can make a lot of products out of. One of them is taking the water that's within coconut and like boiling it down, and we would get like a coconut sugar, a raw coconut sugar. It's like brown, still a sugar. But you would see it like at a health food store usually. The coconut oil, it comes from pressing the flesh until you get the oil out. It is a saturated fat though. If you notice, a saturated fat is one that is hard at room temperature. So it's just one that I would recommend in moderation. It's a great, if you're gonna bake and you want a sweet, it's a good butter substitute.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is that a good separation between hard and more liquefied?
That's a good way that I would look at, like, so if a fat that you would be adding is solid at room temperature, it's likely a saturated fat. If it's liquid at room temperature, it's likely unsaturated, with the exception if it says refined on it, they've done something to it to make it liquid at room temperature.
With the, sorry,
There you
over
go.
here. With the video at the beginning, the study with the MIND diet, I believe, how repetitive was the cognitive testing?
They did it, I know for sure, every year. I don't know if they did it more frequently. I do apologize that I don't know it. I'd be happy to go back to the slide if you want to get the reference, we can look at it.
It's okay. I was just wondering if that's a potential reason for improvement in cognitive function, is the repetition of the testing, not just the diet.
Yes, that is something that can happen. It's like the learning effect within research. Usually most studies will do a wash-in period where they'll have them do the test before the actual measurement for the study.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to say it's 6:30 now, so we want to respect everyone's time. I do have one question. Actually, a couple of people have asked the same thing online, so I wanted to see if you'd address it really quickly. We have questions about diabetes. Since the diabetes rates increase dramatically as we age, what nutrients should pre-diabetics focus on to decrease or delay type 2 diabetes?
Yes, I think it would be it's a complementary approach between reducing the refined carbohydrates and added sugars to increasing those whole grains and those whole sources of carbohydrates. Again, that will that I think is one of the more simpler ways without revamping everything. Again, depending on what's going on for that individual physiologically, a dietitian would be able to better pinpoint the exact thing, but in general, that would be the first swap, and then adding in vegetables if those are lower on your normal daily intake. Oh, yeah, I would swap out your like refined or high sugar carbohydrates for a whole grain. So that swap might look like switching from a piece of white bread to a whole grain bread. Might be switching from white rice to brown rice and doing those small changes first. All right. I think that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Do you need the mic? Okay.